going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode number 205, and I had an over the internet, because that's how everything is done these days, conversation with Donavan Freberg. You may know him, you may recognize him as the Encyclopedia Britannica kid from the 80s. He's done tons of voiceover work, and he's an actor, a photographer. He is the son of the late Stan Freberg, who was a very famous advertising guy, won tons of Clios and Grammys. I mean, he's won all sorts of awards. Stan and producer wife Donna raised Donavan in an eccentric home that was fun and crazy and fascinating. And Donavan was raised up around famous folks that were, not famous to him, just family. He's got some great stories to tell, and Donavan and I have been friends for a little while, but it feels like a really long time. He's just one of those kinds of people. So I'm really excited for you to hear this episode. I want to bring up two charities, feedingamerica.org and redcross.org. Feeding America, of course, is there to help feed America, especially in times of crises. They're a really wonderful, vetted organization, so definitely check them out. And as far as Red Cross goes, blood, plasma, this kinds of things, the Red Cross is hurting. The blood banks are low, and they really, really need us to step up and donate. If you have the ability, if you're well and can do it, please do. It saves a life, and that's a good thing. Okay, social media stuff. Hey Human Podcast can be found on Instagram and Facebook. Susan Ruthism is my personal social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can find me at susanruth.com. Don't forget the links page on heyhumanpodcast.com. I curate the list every single week for every single episode, and this one is no exception. We talk about a lot of different things, and I tried to get some really cool stuff up there. So definitely check it out, including I put Donovan's Encyclopedia Britannica commercial on the links page. So you want to see that. It's fun. You can email me, Susan at heyhumanpodcast.com. Please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being. How about that? Thanks for just being. Because these days, sometimes it feels hard to just be. And that's good enough, So let's get into this. And here we go. Hi.
Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
Yeah.
What's new in your world of social distancing?
Yeah, nothing. There's nothing new. I've decided that new is, there's nothing new. Everybody I talk to is like, what's new? I'm like, what do you mean what's new?
Nothing's new.
Nothing is new. I have a friend on Facebook that was like, we're all in Las Vegas because, I don't know, you've been to Vegas, right?
Yes. Sorry, I'm just adjusting mics while you talk, so this is really good.
No, it's fine. I'm hoping that we don't have to do this podcast all with my face on it. Is that okay?
What do you mean?
I'm glad, although I'm really glad to see your face.
No, it's good I like to be able to look at the person I'm talking to, but I don't record the video, just the audio.
Oh, okay. It's just that I don't have I don't want to have to hold my phone up the whole time. It's a little bit easier for me to do it just audio, but I don't mind.
Oh.
I don't mind. Yeah.
Prop it up on a book or something. Yeah,
I guess so. What will I do? Hold on.
I just feel, for me at least.
Is this okay?
Oh, totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah, for me at least, it's it's more of a communion, to be able to look at you.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah. So
I prefer to be inside of a coffin and just talk to people through like a communicator.
Little hole in the coffin.
Yeah, a hole like a straw.
Is there a nightlight in the coffin?
Yeah.
Snacks?
Yeah, I got it all in there.
What kind of snacks would be in your coffin?
Well, right now it's like sort of a beggars can't be choosers situation with the, So I'm just going to go with what I'm eating a lot of, which is like what a 7-year-old eats. So it's like peanut butter and jelly, cheese, apple slices, celery slices with peanut butter, like crackers.
Do you do the ants on the log with the raisins or no raisins?
Oh, that's a good idea. No, I haven't thought of anything enjoyable or fun during this period. This is a time for me to really embrace being morose as opposed to normal life, which is just me being morose. This is morose with a magnifying glass on it.
This is morose with snacks.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much.
Have you done it? I'm 4 pounds into the COVID-19 pounds.
No, I don't play that game. I grew up in the 80s in Beverly Hills, so everybody was like talking about their weight all the time and their aerobics and shit. And now for me, I'm just like, I don't give a fuck.
But they don't talk about their cocaine? It's the 80s.
You know what's crazy? But is this all part of the podcast? This part too?
God, I hope so.
I do too. It's funny. I was just talking about Jason Bateman.
Oh, I love Jason Bateman.
To my girlfriend. Yeah. Anyway, I won't throw Jason under the bus, but he and I went to high school together, and I just started watching Ozark, which I really like. But Bateman and I'm going to call him Bateman.
Yeah.
I have this running gag that I have a bunch of nemesis, but they're all secretly friends. I'm like, he's my nemesis. But
that's Bateman a good one. He's good looking, smart, funny. I'd make him a nemesis any day.
Exactly, right? He's my nemesis because he's good looking, smart, and funny, and successful and rich. The only thing that he's missing, that I'm missing, is the successful and rich part.
Yes. You can't have everything. You can't fit it all in your coffin.
Jason, like me, has no humility, so, that's why we're nemesis.
I do enjoy his interviews. He cracks me up. He would be a person that I think I would very much enjoy just shooting the shit with.
You should have him on your podcast. He seems like you.
Wonderful. I would love that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. He owes me $40, and I'll just leave that there. And
I'm using that. I'm gonna.
You know what?
I'm gonna go all Sopranos on his ass. Like, listen, you owe Donovan.
Yeah, exactly.
$40, and.
Yep. It was for. I can't disclose what it was for, but
gas. Was it gas money?
No. It's far more interesting than that. Far more interesting. Imagine the craziest thing you can imagine, and then layer on top of it. Yeah.
Boy, I have a really good imagination, so it's getting wild in here already. It
was for distribution of material that was not supposed to be distributed at school. Not drugs, though. At school? Not drugs. Although he was a cocaine person, and he got cleaned up, and he had to do, those TV ads for, Drug-Free America or whatever with, Robert Evans. I think he was part of that deal.
Robert Evans and Drug-Free America. That seems counterintuitive, but that's okay.
Oh, you should watch the Robert Evans documentary if you haven't.
I did, and it's fantastic.
Right? And he did the drug. Just say no to drugs or whatever the hell it is, and they're all baked out and
they're so high.
Minds. Yeah. They're high as fuck. So
my dear friend John was very good friends with Robert Evans and had some fantastic stories.
Yeah, so here's what's weird is that I never really did drugs. I didn't even smoke pot.
What? Till
I was in my early 20s. Because growing up around it, I think you either gravitate towards it, towards bugs it to a light, or you just sort of think, ugh, I don't want anything to do with that. And it scared me so much. I was always a hypochondriac like I am now, and had severe OCD. And so I was so afraid of dying from drugs. And I saw I had friends OD and die.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm not doing that. And then weed, I always thought, this just doesn't appeal to me. And I had a really good experience the first time I smoked weed. But I've never even become a really heavy pot smoker.
I did drugs in high school. I was really into it for about 2 years. And then I just sort of, I would say boredom. It became boring to me. And that was that.
That's cool. That's how I feel about it as an adult. The only thing I've really done is smoked weed. And I did it for a while with a girlfriend I was with for a while that was, she was she would wake and bake her on the weekend. And I was like, all right, I'll try this. I'm up for trying anything.
Do you see that oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The Playboy behind you?
Yeah.
My grandfather had that Playboy, and my mother said that I found it when I was about 4, and then I went into the bedroom and pulled out black socks out of I guess my father's drawer or my grandfather. I don't know. I guess my father's drawer, and and mimicked that and made her take my picture. I've never seen the photograph, so I don't know if it's true. Okay. But what year is that? Which episode is that? Playboy.
You know, it's funny we're talking about Playboy because I'm going to bring that into the conversation, but I don't know.
Oh.
What this is behind me is my friend Sarah. Her mother is an amazing travel photographer, and she takes photographs when she travels and then puts them on canvas.
Oh.
So this is somewhere in Russia. And that Playboy, I just love the way it looks. It's just cool looking. It looks like a painting, but it's not.
It's
and her work is, her work is really cool. Her name is Lisa Ross. She's rad.
All right.
Yeah, she's not doing much traveling right now.
No, just in her mind.
Travels in the mind.
Yes, the VR of the brain. All right, so let's start the podcast, shall we?
Oh, great. Now, yeah.
Donovan Freberg, welcome to Hey Human Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a long time coming, and it took quarantine and a global pandemic to get me on the show.
I think... I don't know if that says more about you or me, really.
It says everything about me and my level of narcissism, probably.
Oh, that's so funny. I
adore you, though.
I adore you, too.
I just want to say, I love you, and I love your podcast, and I love your brand, and your whole just energy and spirit is so beautiful, and it's a light, and it's really needed during this time.
Thank you, love. Thank you. I adore you, too, and that means a lot to me. I appreciate it.
It's an honor to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor to be here with you.
It's an honor to be in quarantine.
With you.
Separate but apart.
Even though you can't share your snacks. That's fine.
Right.
I want to read something that is on your blog because it made me chuckle. Okay. It said, my childhood was a Wonka-infused cross between the Osbournes and the Royal Tannenbaums, as seen through the eyes of Tim Burton, David Lynch, and Woody Allen. I didn't get the name Donovan till I was 5 years old, and Santa Claus named me in July. Let's start with your childhood, shall we?
Sure.
You are a child of California, born and raised.
Born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I'm a second-generation native Californian on my daddy's side. And Dad was born in Pasadena. My mom was from Chicago and grew up a lot in the South in Louisiana, spent a lot of time traveling around before she came out to California, but pretty much also a native California because she was pretty much hunkered down here from like 20 on. So
20 years old? Yeah.
Yep. So she considered herself, she'd watched Chicago Cubs on TV, and she was the only sports fan in the family. But yeah, she had some Chicago pride and some Southern pride, but my dad was a true native Californian, and I think I am.
And your parents were both in the business to a high degree, in fact.
Very high degree, yes.
Let's spit out their accolades real quick, just to get a foundation.
Sure. So my father's name is Donna Freberg. He was he started off his career as a voiceover artist. He was in over 200 Warner Brothers cartoons. He started in the business by saying to his parents, I think today I'm going to go break into Hollywood. And my grandfather, who was a Baptist minister and kind of strict but open-minded, said, okay, let's pray about it. So they prayed to Jesus that my father would get into the business. And my father got in a bus in Pasadena and said, let me off in the middle of Hollywood. And the bus driver looked at him like he was nuts and said, okay, kid. And they literally dropped him off at Hollywood and Vine. My dad got out of the bus, went to the tallest building he could find, and saw Stars of Tomorrow, which was a talent agency. Probably, who knows. This has got to be after, my dad was in the end of World War II, so this has got to be right after World War II. So he gets off the bus, does this, goes up there, and they ask him, what's your talent? What do you do? Like, or do you do magic? Do you do vaudeville? Like, this is old, right? So he says, I do voices. So it's very much like that scene in Mrs. Doubtfire where she's like, what do you mean you do voices? And he's like, he does all these crazy voices, and then they're like, huh, there's this place called Warner Brothers that's doing cartoons that might be interested in, we'll see if you can get you an audition. And so my dad goes to Warner Brothers and they ask them if they can do voices, and they say, can you do a spider monkey? And my father says, I'm an expert in doing a spider monkey, but I have laryngitis. And so I have to come back tomorrow. And they're like, okay. So he, of course, has no idea what a spider monkey sounds like. He runs to the zoo, spends the night on the ground in a tent at the zoo and listens to the spider monkey all night long, goes back and nails the spider monkey. And Chuck Jones and Friz Freeling, who are like legends in the business, come out and say, well, you're hired. So they got him one job, and then he proceeded to another. And anyway, that's a long way of getting to the fact that he then went into doing puppets and inspired Jim Henson. And he's the only person in advertising to have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And he's won 21 Clios, the Cannes Film Festival, a Grammy, an Emmy, 2 Emmys. He's almost, what do they call it when you won an Oscar?
The EGOT.
Yeah, he's almost an EGOT. He also named the Grammy, which is interesting. He was one of the founding members of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. And they asked everybody, what should we call this thing? We're going to call this award. And my father said, I don't know. And somebody wanted to call it the Eddie after Edison. And at the time, Eddie Fisher, which is later that plays into my family too. But Eddie Fisher, they want to call it the Eddie. And my dad was like, it's gonna be named after Eddie Fisher. People think it's going to be named after Eddie Fisher. He's the biggest recording artist right now. And nobody's going to think of it as Edison. Why don't we name it after the gramophone, the Grammy? And so they voted. And next thing you know, it was named the Grammy.
Legend.
Yeah. So that stories like that abound. That's just people are like, wow, that's this one story. No. There's so many stories that we could do 12 podcasts about them. And I may do my own podcast at some point because people are always like, when are you going to write the book? Anyway. And my mom and dad met because my mom was Frank Sinatra's assistant. And,
oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's its own crazy story, and which I'll briefly tell, which is that my mom was a secretary at CBS and then became a color model for television because they had just come out with color TV, and Mr. Sinatra saw my mom and basically said that he wanted her. So my mom was a tough, Chicago dame and said, what for what does he want me, And so they said, well, I don't know. Mr. Frank Sinatra wants a meeting with you. And she said, all right, well, no funny business. So she goes to meet with Frank, and they hit it off. And he says, would you like to be my secretary? And she says, first of all, you have to pay me more than I'm being paid as a color model. And second of all, yes. Third of all, I'm never going to go to bed with you, Mr. Sinatra, even though I think that you are a good-looking guy and obviously a playboy and so on. And he says, okay, you're not going to sleep with me. And she says, never. And my mom was a real beauty. Frank Sinatra called her a hell on high heels. Anyway, he says, is that a promise? You're really not going to sleep with me? Is that, you promise? And she said, yeah, it's a promise. And so he said, you're hired. And then that's basically the beginning of my mom's career. And then my dad was doing a puppet on the Frank Sinatra TV show and met my dad there, and they were married shortly thereafter.
That's a wonderful story.
It's pretty nuts, yeah. So I grew up steeped in this world of, by the time I came along, 1970s and 80s Hollywood, and my parents were, in the business.
Golden age, such an age. I mean, the
totally.
50s through the 75s, yeah. I guess,
Yep, totally. I feel, my sister is 15 years older than me, so when she was coming up, she got to meet the Beatles with my dad. Got to meet, my dad was on the Monkees, got to hang out with all the Monkees, and my sister just knew everybody famous, was best friends with Dean Martin's kids.
And sister-in-law to Carrie Fisher.
That's a whole other side note. It's one of the things about Hollywood that people, I think, know but don't know is that it's incestuous.
Absolutely. Very. So much so.
I mean, it's it's such a small club, and it used to be even smaller, that everybody knows everybody who knows everybody. So, it's just the way it was.
What was that like to be first of all, how is it you weren't named until you were 5?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, okay, so my mother had my sister 15 years before me, right? And by the time I came along, my mother was almost 40, like clocking around 39. Now, these days, it's not unheard of for a woman to have a baby at 40. Not at all. It's still considered like, wow, you have to be careful or whatnot, but it's nothing wrong with that. But back then, in 1970, 71, didn't happen. And prior to my mother getting pregnant with me, she had an ovarian cyst and a big operation where things went south quickly. And the doctor said, look, I was able to save your reproductive organs and save just a tiny, like, moon sliver of an ovary, which the chances of you getting pregnant off of that are nil. So you can basically go off whatever birth control you're using. Don't worry about it. At your age, these sexist doctors. And so my mom says, great, that's terrific news because I don't want another kid. So, and then on the set of the most expensive television commercial ever made by my father, which was with Ann Miller dancing on a soup can, my mother became violently ill and throwing up, and she's convinced that it's the potato salad. Anyway, doctor comes and says, when was your last period? And she says, I don't know, months ago. And he says, okay, and you've been nauseous when? And she said, every morning. And he goes, you look pretty good for food poisoning. You're glowing. And she said, oh, shut up. So, and then Ann Miller, who was in the commercial, said, honey, you're pregnant. You got a bun in the oven. And then next thing you know, she's in total denial the whole pregnancy that has a baby. Like, she thinks it's false pregnancy. She thinks it's a hysterical pregnancy. She's convinced that she's gaining weight for no reason. It's crazy. I come out and the doctor says, now do you believe me? Like, with this infant. Now, they had listened to my heartbeat, evidently. This is before amniocentesis or ultrasound. And they said, oh, there's definitely a baby in there, and it's got a really fast heartbeat. And so girls tend to have faster heartbeats than boys, and you had a girl already, so likelihood of it being a girl is high. And they said, okay, great, we'll name her April, because I was going to be named in April. I come out, and... In April, and I'm a boy, and they go, oh, God, we can't... What are we going to name this kid? And so it goes on. And my dad literally they call me baby for 5 years straight. And I don't think anything of it. In fact, now when people pet name me baby or go, hey, baby, I turn around like it's so cognitively part of my reality. Anyway, my sister at the time was dating Sean Cassidy. And Sean Cassidy's brother, David Cassidy, said, I can't stand this shit. Calling this baby, it's sick. So I'm going to call him something else. So my sister says, whatever, David, like, go ahead. Like, David was interesting. So he called me Damien, which is like such a weird name because it's like satanic, And so my mother comes along and says, I hear you calling the baby Damien. And David's like, I'm so sorry, Mrs. F. That's what they call my mom. I'm so sorry, Mrs. F. Like, no disrespect, but it's just, I can't hang with the baby thing, man. It's too weird, man. And so she goes, no, you know what? It's not bad, but we got to revise it. So my dad and her settle on Donovan. Now, this is not even the joke punchline, but my sister's name is Donna and my mother's name is Donna. So it took them 5 years to extend Donovan. And I get this, we celebrated Christmas all year long. We kept the tree up all year long, and there was stockings hung by the fire. And so every once in a while, like on Easter or 4th of July or whatnot, you'd get a little like chocolate in your stocking or something fun, and on birthdays, you would get like a little birthday present in your stocking. And so...
Would they be from Santa? Just these random...
Yes.
Okay.
Every one of them. And they'd be typed. My father would type them. And so, because my father was Santa. So, I look and I go, there's something in my stocking. I'm 5. And so my dad goes, I know, there's something in your stocking. You should go take a look. And there's a little step ladder to get me up there. And I go up and I open I pull this thing out of the stocking, and it says, baby, your new name is Donovan. Love, Santa. And so I was like, what is this? And he's like, it's your name. It's your name. Santa Claus named you finally. And I was like, I have to think about this. I have to live with it. I have to try it on. And so my parents were really liberal and very cool. And they were like, all right, try it on. See what you think. We're going to call you Donovan. And it took me weeks to be able to respond to it, because people would call me Donovan. I'd be like, oh yeah, that's my name. Okay. And so for a while they would call me Baby Donovan or Donovan Baby. And then it kind of stuck. And then of course school started, which that helped, because my dad, I think, knew that I was already going to get bullied, and Donovan was going to be a better choice than Baby, and Donovan was a singer. A lot of people think I was named after Donovan the singer, which would be awesome, because I love Donovan the singer. He's one of my favorites, but I wasn't even aware of his music till I was in my teens, so no.
Was the fact that your sisters and your division in ages was so massive a big deal, or did you take to each other?
It's strange. In a way, it made it easier for us because we didn't have a lot of sibling rivalry, because by the time I was old enough to even worry about stuff having my own room or having, whatever, she had already gotten married. But she was married to Todd, I think, at 19. So,
oh, she got married young. But that's the things people did that back then, I guess. Yeah,
so by the time I was 6 years old, she was out of the house. So we didn't fight that much. She was more like another mom. And she was super conservative back then and a born-again Christian. So it was like...
That's like the Alex P. Keaton syndrome.
Totally. She was Alex P. Keaton, who I love, but completely. So my mother would be like, I don't care if I found the Playboy in your room I found the cigarette in your room or whatever, and I'm like, oh my God. And my mom would be like, it's fine. You're a teenager. You're experimenting. Just, it's cool, but don't tell your sister, or hide it from Donna. And so, it's still to this day, my sister, we get along great, but it's very clear that she had a very different upbringing than I did. Also, my parents were at the height of their fame, Beatles fame at that level when she was growing up, going to the Oscars, going to the Grammys, and by the time I came along, my parents' career had kind of tanked. Not tanked, but just was going down. And then my dad at that time decided, all right, I'm just going to retire basically and raise the baby. Which is great for me because I got to spend all my time with Dad and Mom.
Yeah, and I read on part of the blog that you got a present every day?
Yes, for waking up. Yeah, I got a present. I mean, it's beyond spoiled. I tell people that I was ruined, which is true. And it started out as a good idea, kind of a cognitive behavioral reinforcement, like gold stars, right? Like if you do get an A, you get, a present, or you get whatever, you get the class, whatever, you get a ribbon, you get a prize. And so I hated school more than anything in the world. We won't even go there. It was just horrible. And so eventually they said, listen, if you go to school consecutively for 5 days in a row, you get your present. But that didn't last. So then it was just every day you make it to school, you'll get a present. And it wasn't anything like crazy. It could just be like a little balsa wood 99-cent glider, or like Jack's, or, a eraser, whatever.
What was it that you hated about school? Everything.
Well, first of all, my parents didn't warn me what it was. I didn't really see other children till then.
Because they're brutal.
Yeah, and my father said to me, "Listen, son, tomorrow's going to be a bad day for you." And at first I thought, "Oh God, I got to go get a booster shot, or what's going on?" And he said, "The government mind control program is going to basically induct you into this forced labor camp of daily ritual, and every day you're going to have to go to this place." And I'm already weeping, right? As a child, I'm crying, and I was like, "Can't you do something, please?" And my mother was like, "We're trying everything we can with our lawyers to get you out of this mess, but tomorrow begins this, And it was so badly. My parents were great, and 90% of what they did was perfect, and 10% of what they did was deeply damaging. And this was part of the 10%. To tell your child that they're about to go to a forced labor. I mean, my father was just they're out to get us, and they're going to program your mind. And
was he a conspiracy theorist? Was he just being funny, and you were too young to get it, or?
My father wrote some commercials to help get us out of the Vietnam War, to help with the McGovern-Hatfield Amendment, where you can actually look it up on YouTube. He was on the Dick Cavett show. And during that time of the Dick Cavett show, he actually got death threats. And when he was in Washington, D.C., he was staying at the Watergate Hotel, and he was one of the people investigated by the Watergate burglars. Mm. And at one point there was a kidnapping threat against me. There was at one point there was, my father basically knew that the government, Vietnam, all that stuff was dark shadow government shit. So my father, yes, was a heavy conspiracy theorist, and he was convinced that public school, and he's not wrong, public school began as a result of the Industrial Revolution to basically, for factory workers.
Well, that's why we did the Pledge of Allegiance, which I don't know if that's still done, but school ain't,
I did it.
School ain't what it used to be.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And I don't know that...
Our textbooks and things growing up were heavily propagandized.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I didn't even know about Howard Zinn or People's History of the United States or any of that cool stuff.
Or the internment camps and Japanese internment camps. I didn't know about that until I was in college.
See, my father was teaching me that before I even went to school. My father was like, "Listen, this is the real deal."
No wonder you have anxiety issues.
And we took some of our own people and put them in camps, and we dropped bombs, and there's Nazis, and they're still real, and they still walk the streets, and
we hired them.
Yeah, exactly. And my dad was friends with the Black Panthers.
Cool.
My dad was funny. He now it would sound racist, but back then he grew out his white afro as big as he could get it, and he he would walk in the streets and be like, "Power to the people," and my dad was just a kind of a strange, almost like a hippie, but not quite, more of a resistance fighter. And so he trained me from a young age. And by the time I got to school, they were like, "Oh, here we go. Doggy, kitty, this is the apple, this is the train. It goes choo-choo." And I was like, "Okay, great. But what about Vietnam? What about all the boys dying over there? What about, black people dying? What about slavery? What about the fact that our own country had a civil war?" And they're like, "Keep quiet over there," which only reinforced the fact that, and I would come home and say, "They don't want me to talk about that." And he's like, "Of course they don't. Talk louder." So
did you have to take self-defense?
My mother came with me to school for a few days to make sure everything was all right. And then my father would come to school and talk to bullies if there was a problem, things that would literally get a person arrested now. I had a really bad bully that was actually physically beating on me. And my father came to school and said, "Listen, hey, we want to befriend you. You can come over. We have a pool. We have Atari. Come hang out. We have pizza, and would you like to be Donovan's friend? Like, this is a good choice for you. And he's like, yeah, I want to do that. He's like, well, I heard you're beating Donovan up. Like, can you guys be friends? And he was like, yeah. He's like, okay, this is the first conversation we're going to have about this. And you might change your mind. And if you change your mind, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be a different man.
Oh my God.
And so, like, my dad asked me for days, like, how's it going with that guy? And I was like, you know what? He's being pretty cool to me now. Like, we're kind of friends. And then one day, this guy just decided I'm going to bully him again. And he hit me with a stick and, like, scratched my face open, like cut it. And I got home and my dad was like, what happened to your face? And I was like, I fell. And my dad's like, I don't think you did you? And I started crying and I was like, no, that boy. And he's like, I'll take care of it. And so the next day he comes to school and tells him, have you heard of the boogeyman? Do you know who that is? And he says, yeah, my mommy and daddy told me he wasn't real. And he said, they lied to you, son. They lied. I'm the boogeyman. And I steal children and I put them in the trunk of my car and take them back to the house. And then I put them in an oven that has a glass front and I can see their skin melt off of their face. And I sit there and I eat popcorn while I'm watching it. And I've only done this a few times, but I'd like to try it again. I have a taste for it. And if you touch my son again, I will take you home and I will burn you alive in my boogeyman oven. And this child, I never saw him again. He was like damaged, or I don't know. I don't even know what happened to him. All I know is like, didn't go well. And my mother was like, Stan, what has happened? Like they had to go to, I don't think they went to court, but it was basically like a bad situation. Like
God.
He physically threatened the child. But it got out at school that my dad was a boogeyman for a while. And so I didn't get too much beatings after that.
That's awesome.
Because people thought it was crazy. And
man, the 70s, huh? Get away with shit.
Right? If it happened now, my dad, probably go to jail or you'd be sued for sure.
In the 70s, parents just opened their doors and get the hell out of our house till the sun comes down, you know?
Yeah,
kids
totally.
just sort of went and did their thing. And
my parents were super overprotective, but I do remember like a lot of just like riding my bike and kind of like Stranger Things, like my walkie-talkies and hanging out with the neighborhood kids and playing in the pool and just not a whole lot of helicopter parenting going on. Although my parents were always watching. But yeah, I miss the 70s. I miss everything about the 70s. I feel like that era, it was so wonderfully dark and strange and I don't know, it was beautiful.
So I'm a big fan of Carrie Fisher. Did you have a lot of experience around that because she was your sister-in-law?
Oh, God, yes. Of course. It was Carrie. It was Carrie. A lot of people are fans of Carrie, and I have a lot to say about Carrie, but I'll just say that she was one of the most brilliant and kind people ever.
I don't think people even realize how over-the-top smart she was.
Oh. Carrie's level of intelligence was, and Todd's, both. That whole family, honestly, and Debbie Reynolds as well. But especially Todd and Carrie, something happened where they both became true, like, Mensa geniuses. And Carrie particularly, in terms of just her wit and her sarcasm and her ability to, like, just see through all bullshit was amazing. And what was most amazing growing up is we would get these memos back from Carrie that she was making this terrible science fiction B movie. And she was like, this movie is terrible. The director is an idiot. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. There's like people in bear costumes. We're running around. And because back then, it was the beginning of green screen, right? So they didn't know what was going to come. The special effects weren't added in yet. So she's like, we're goofing around like we're in a bad Charlie Chaplin film, like with these like fake ropes, and we're supposed to fight with a light sword, and like this film is going to be shit. So, if this thing actually releases, for God's sake, just play it down. Don't talk about it. Just
because she was 19 or 20 when
yeah. I'm glad to get a paycheck out of this, but like you know, this is going to really be a stinker. And like, I remember my sister saying that like, I was there, like I was very little, but we were watching this movie at Fox, like a trailer or a premiere. And she had no idea. It literally turned her overnight into, it was like Princess Leia, for God's sake. And it was nuts. I mean, we couldn't, it was difficult though, because we couldn't really go out with Carrie once it became very famous, because people were like, oh my God, it's Princess Leia. Like, for some reason, I would go out with Sean Cassidy and people would freak out, or I'd go out with Debbie Boone or all the other 70s icons my sister hung out with, or Dean Martin, or, and be like, oh, wow, it's Dean Martin. But go out with Carrie and it's like, uh-oh, big problem. And so, as a result of that, she really had to become kind of a shut-in, And I remember her house in Laurel Canyon, and just, I didn't know much about drugs back then. I just knew that Carrie was sick. Carrie would go through episodes where she was sick or she was not up to speed, and Todd would be like, Carrie's, she's sick. I do remember, though, that Carrie sent me the world's largest chocolate bar, which was a 10-pound chocolate bar from Ghirardelli Chocolate. And it was so good. And I remember I felt bad because I was like Augustus Gloop. And I was like right at the peak of me being like chubby, awkward stage. And I ate this thing in like a month or something, like pretty fast, right? It's a 10-pound chocolate bar. And so I tell Carrie's like, hey, did you like the chocolate bar? And I was like, I loved it, but it's over. And she's like, no problem. And so like 2 days later, I got 2 more.
Oh my God.
Like Carrie's generosity, her level of just like, what do you need, honey? And her just sardonic kind of wit. But it was very familiar because that's how my mother was. That's how Debbie Reynolds was. That's how a lot of those sort of crones.
The Dorothy Parker kind of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, like.
I'm so attracted to that archetype. I love it. It's just genius, witty, smart-ass, cutting, cocktail in the hand. Love it.
Cigarette in the other.
Yeah.
Yep.
Love it.
Yeah, that's Carrie.
The anti-memes, all that. Yeah.
That's every woman that raised me. All of them. It was like I was raised by all of anti-memes.
How did that shape how you found your sexuality then? I mean, that's a really specific, strong woman.
Absolutely. To go back to school, so first week of school, I go and look at the boys, and I was just like, okay, these guys are roughhousing, they are footballing, they are spitting, and all kinds of other uncouth things. And I think at that point I had to decide, like, do I want to go hang out with them? Right? And so keep in mind also that my sister's friends, they sort of treated me like the baby. I was always like in the bed with like tickling, and like they would paint my toenails and paint my fingernails and all this other stuff. And like, anyway, I would look over then at the girls and I'd be like, oh, look, they're over there. They're playing with their dollies. They're playing with their puffy stickers. They're playing with their glitter. Oh, they're baking a pie. Like, this kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, I know which camp I'm in. I'm going to the girls. And I went over to the girls and was like, can I play with you guys? And they were like, yeah. And that was actually the beginning of when a lot of bullying stopped, because the girls would protect me, just like my older sister. But this is how I know for a fact in my mind that if you are gay, I believe you are born that way. Because it just never occurred to me that I would be attracted to a boy. And like, I can look at guys and be like, God, that guy's fucking hot. Holy shit. I mean, look at Kyle MacLachlan, or, oh my God, look at, whoever, Johnny Depp, or I could list 100 guys that I think are hot. But from like day one, my sexuality has always been heterosexual. And I've thought about having sex with a guy, But I kind of everything that I think about, I think, okay, let me really imagine it from beginning to end and get it and really play it out in my mind. Here's how it's going to go. And then when I get to the end of the sex with a guy, I'm like, you know what? Just not my thing. But I totally get it. And it's funny because my best friend in high school was gay. And my dad said to me, son, you know, there's some boys that like boys. And I was like, yeah, duh. And then he started talking to me about how his best friend was getting married to a guy. And I was like, yeah, all right, that's cool. Like, of course he's getting married to a guy. His partner's a man. And he's like, but I want you to understand that if you like boys, that's okay. In fact, it's good. Like, whatever you want to do is good. Whatever makes you happy. And I was like, sure, I get it. Like, I understand, but I like girls. And then it took me years to figure out, I think they thought I was in love with my best friend. And I was in love with him, but I just didn't have sex with him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so now I've recently kind of found a new part of myself, which is that I'm polyamorous. And of course, this makes sense. Everyone I've talked to is like, oh, God, of course you are, Donovan. But my parents almost had like, and this is so taken aback when I tell people this, but my parents and my sister growing up and everyone around me almost kind of loved me in a romantic way. It's like an asexual romantic way. Like, they couldn't have loved me more. Like cuddles and touches and just everything, nothing sexual. But like, I don't know what, this is a tangent I'm on now. You've thrown me onto a tangent. But yeah, I'm comfortable in my sexuality. But I also know that one day I could wake up and be like, hey, I'm bi or I'm gay. And that's cool. But that day hasn't come yet. So
that's fair.
Yeah. I'm very fluid. Like, I love millennials and I love Generation Z. And I think this generation finally is getting it right.
Yeah, it's a very open, and they just, if it feels good, groovy, why put a name to it?
I felt like that since I was 2. So sure. It doesn't even occur to me that wouldn't be, like, I'm here to de-shame people. I feel like that's my goal in life. Like,
sure. It's a good goal. Man. I like that goal.
Yeah. Is you got 2 grown-ups and they consent to something and they want to do it. Or you got 3 grown-ups.
People have their own. People carry their own shame to such a severity that I feel like they don't need an outside influence shaming them.
Yeah. For God's sake, we're all filled with shame, and it's normal. Shame is like an automatic part of us. And so, like, why, as they say in Buddhism, like, why press the bruise? Right? Like don't second arrow yourself. There's also that term in Buddhism where the second arrow is judging yourself that you got shot by the arrow. You know, it's like, okay, no, just take out the arrow. Don't second arrow yourself by judging why it happened.
I love that.
We're so judgmental. We live in a very judgmental. I believe this time, maybe not Corona time, but like this specific time in history it's almost like we're living in another 50s. It's like, Jesus, we're being judgmental. But at the same time, we see younger culture coming out in a way that's shame-free.
It's going to be a very interesting next 100 years, but I'm glad I won't be around for it.
Right, I am too.
I mean, it's exhausting enough. I'd written a note down, Mrs. Clark's house.
Oh, yeah.
What is this about?
So the house behind my house, we lived in Beverly Hills in a big old mansion, and the house behind our house was abandoned. And Mrs. Clark was married to the guy that owned, at the time, the LA Rams, which was a big, football team. And she, died, okay? And we would go into her house, break into this mansion at night with flashlights, me and my dad and our live-in security guard guy, who became a worldwide security expert. Anyway, we'd break into Mrs. Clark's house and bring back bags of loot to our house. We basically looted the place every night.
Oh my God, what?
yeah, my dad thought it was just terrible that like all this like art and tiles and doorknobs and chandeliers and whatever else you could get your hands on.
They didn't have children or anything? They were just, no, okay.
It was just one of those weird Beverly Hills mansions that was abandoned. And my dad checked it out. I mean, it stayed abandoned for quite a long time. And so my dad checked into it, like, is anybody there? Is anybody coming to get the stuff? And there was a demolition order. They were going to just bulldoze the place. And so my father would come home every night and go, I went and checked it out over there, and I don't think anybody's coming back for that stuff. We should go get it. And so me and Dad and Todd and Gavin and whoever else like that my dad could rally would go over there. And one night the Beverly Hills police showed up and said, put your hands up above your head. And my dad said, I'm sorry, sir, officer, I cannot do that. And nowadays he'd probably get shot, or, you know, if he was black, he'd probably have gotten shot then. But, you know, there was the Beverly Hills police. So they said, okay, why cannot one more chance you've got to put your hands above your head. You understand me? I see something in your hands. What is that? And he goes, I've got a baby in my hands. It's my son. And so at this point, they kind of soften. And then Gavin, who is just a genius, says, like, I'm Gavin DeBecker. I'm a security expert. Like, Mr. Freberg has a baby in his arms. Like, everybody's got their hands up. And somehow my father convinces, this is at my dad's memorial that we talked about, Gavin talked about this. I don't know how, but somehow not only did my dad not get arrested, he convinced the police officers that he was doing a community service, and they helped us carry all the bags back to the house. All cops.
Now wait, so was he holding a pretend baby, or were you a baby at this point?
I'm in his arms.
Oh, so he means just like my kid, not a baby, but because you were old enough to remember or not?
I don't remember a lot of it. I was probably 4.5.
Okay, so he's still calling you baby at this time. So confusing.
Well, I wasn't named yet.
I know.
I was 4.5.
I know.
So they're shining this flashlight. I remember the flashlight shining in my eyes.
It's amazing.
And I kind of remember my dad telling me, it's interesting because I know you've done shows about police. I remember my dad saying to me, look, there's some bad policemen and there's some good policemen. And you don't know what policeman you're going to get. So you have to just sort of play the game and know that the likelihood of you getting a bad policeman is higher than you getting a good one. So just play the game and don't alarm them, because they're on very high alert that they're frightened. And frightened animals will bite. So that's how you have to think about a cop, a frightened animal.
I would say that's good advice to give.
A child, I guess. I mean, but
12-year-olds get shot and killed these days.
I know. But my mother was like, they're probably, most of them are, my mother was a little more conservative, so she was like, they're probably not going to hurt you because we're white. Like, you know, she was also aware of divide.
Absolutely.
She grew up in the South and got whipped because she drank out of a colored fountain.
Whipped by a white person?
Yes.
Yeah.
And she said, she said, what, where are you? She befriended, her best friend was black. This is in Louisiana in the 40s. And they were like, you can't be friends with this girl. And she was like, I can be friends with whoever I want. And so they were like, why can't I be friends with her? And so she kept going to get her drink, and she kept saying, I can't drink out of that fountain. And my mom was like, why not? I don't understand. She's like, well, we have to go drink out of the hose in the back. And my mom's like, she's like 12, and she's like, this is bullshit. So she goes around the back and like sees this drink fountain, and she's like, I want to try this water. So she drinks out of the hose, and she starts arguing with the teacher, and they both got whipped. And my mom I also heard this story when I'm like 10. So I'm like, okay, we live in a fucked up, this is fucked up. And my mom's like, yeah. And you know what's even more bad? Like, this shit's still going on undercover. And I'm like, no way. No way. And she's like, yep, it still is. It's the 70s. We're like 30, 40 years out before this shit's going to
or
stop.
60, 70, 80.
Right. She was being optimistic.
Yeah, she was.
But my parents, they did not sugarcoat anything, ever.
But knowing that, I'm surprised they let you become an actor, considering.
Well, that's its own story. So they did let me become an actor, but it was only because I wanted to do it. And I, at a young age, was cast in a commercial of my dad's. My dad cast me. And
was that the encyclopedia?
No, this is many years before that. I'm 6 years old. I'm just reading a voiceover script. And I was like, I got a check in the mail for like $300. And I was pretty spoiled, but like, that's a lot of money. Now I'm like, I made more money then than I do now. So in the mail, I get this check and I'm like, wait a minute, I got paid for that? And they're like, yeah, you get paid if you talk. And you get paid to talk. And I was like, oh my God, is this something I can do for a living? Like, I'm little, and they're like, yeah, I mean, there's other things you could do for a living. You could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, you could be a fireman, you could be a nurse, you could be a hairdresser. There's so many different things you could be. Like, anybody you see working, you could do that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do any of that. I want to talk for money. And so I just joined the Screen Actors Guild at 7. And but my mom gave me this talk, which was this. She said, listen, there's a lot of creeps out there and they prey on kids. That's why every time you're going to go to an audition or anytime you're on a set, mommy's coming with you. And if I see any bullshit, I am going to ream some motherfucker.
She's going to send the boogeyman because she's married to him.
Yeah, exactly. But the real boogeyman's my mom.
Yeah,
so
well, amen.
I remember like going to one audition and just my mom being there and just saying to my mom, like, was that guy I got a funny feeling, Mom. And she's like, so did I. Like, we're not going back there. And I remember her walking into this office and telling this guy that he was a pervert. Like she said, I saw the way you were talking to those kids, motherfucker, and you're a goddamn pervert. And this was my mother, like, and he was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you know exactly what I'm talking about, you sicko. And like, she probably shut the whole place down, I'm sure. My mother had Frank Sinatra on speed dial, so occasionally she would make a call, I'm sure, to her people.
Did you have a lot of experience around Frank Sinatra?
I remember briefly meeting him when I was like very young. And I remember my dad would always call him Uncle Frank. And I remember my mom corresponding with him via letters. They stayed friends for a very long time. But I don't remember him being around at that point, no.
Your mom and dad, 10, 20 years of difference in age, or are they pretty close in age?
No, pretty close. Well, actually, hold on. 4 years apart.
Oh, that's nothing. Okay.
Yeah, nothing is right. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I think of my mom as so much younger because she died a lot earlier than my dad did because she smoked herself to death. And so my dad lived a lot longer, but gosh, and she just, I don't know, they were both old souls and children at the same time. But my mom
beautiful.
My parents definitely taught me things that now seem obvious, but back then was like, be careful. And drugs. She taught me about drugs and sex, everything, very early on. And so I feel lucky.
Do you think that learning about sex early on, it's like my parents taught me everything about sex early on. I got the books and the lectures and all that stuff. And I lost my virginity when I was 18. And I do think there's something to the more you know, the less enticing or exciting it is.
Well, I don't want to gender anyone or say it's different because obviously it has nothing to do with that. But I remember from a very young age being interested in sex and wanting to try it. I remember calling a hooker when I was 12.
Oh my God. What? I was boy crazy. I just wasn't interested in having the sex. I wanted the kissing part and the cuddly parts.
Sure. No, I just wanted to fuck.
Yeah.
So
okay.
like
you were DTF, yo, at 12.
I was DTF. So like, I remember getting like those back
pages.
Yeah, but they used to be called something else, and it's the LA Express.
Oh my goodness!
And I called a number, and I was like, "Hello, I'd like to get a lady tonight," and like they called my mom back because like they wanted a credit card, and my mom was like, "Did you call this number? Did you do this?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like playing stupid, you know? And she's like, "Don't bullshit me. You called a hooker," and I was like, "What's a hook? Like, does that mean, is that I tried to call his girlfriend. Like, is she going to come over?" And so then, of course, my mom gave me the sex talk, and it was rough. But like from that day forward, I thought, I want to try this.
I want that. That sounds good.
Yeah. And my it was neat because my parents were very much like, this is a beautiful thing. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just as normal as eating or sleeping or anything else. It's just a human function. And, you know...
Some people do all of it at the same time.
Yeah. And so I didn't think much of it, really.
There was a question I wanted to ask you after you talked about Mrs. Clark's house. Do you have anything still from Mrs. Clark's house? No.
You know, I have so little left of my physical childhood and legacy that it's sad. I really don't. I wish I did. I thought everything was just going to last forever. And the one thing that I wasn't prepared for, they prepared me for everything else. Like, hey, you know, when you go out with your black friend and you get pulled over, shit's, you know, you got to be an ally. Like, shit that is now so far ahead of its time. And the sex thing and the drugs thing and everything, I was prepared. Social issues, 1,000% prepared. Like, unbelievable. But when it comes to death and the fact that, like, that was the one thing that, like, my friend says, "God, Donovan, you're kind of you're like the bourgeois Buddha in a way," because it's like you were raised in this mansion and taught about everything, but you weren't really taught about death or the fact that, like, things are going to go. That came later. But and then my dad disappeared. That's a whole other story that I won't get into too deeply. But, you know, my dad remarried after my mom died and cracked up and left us. And basically, like, they ghosted us. Like my mom died and my dad ghosted us all. And it was like...
This man who absolutely worshipped you just vanished.
Yeah. And, you know, I called Gavin, my sort of male confidant and nanny and worldwide threat assessment security expert, because my dad was stalked by this woman, and basically she targeted him, and I think there was some elder abuse going on, possibly. I don't know. She dug up my mother's grave. Lots of terrible stuff happened.
Oh, you told me that story. Yeah, I don't know if you're talking about that.
Really terrible stuff happened.
Oof.
But it's sick. But anyway, she made sure we were never going to see my dad again. And what Gavin said was, "That's not your dad anymore." Like, when he was so attached, my parents worked together for 40 years and were married for 48 years. And so the only thing I can say is that when my mom died, my dad's kind of started unraveling like a sweater. And this woman kind of like swooped in, literally, and was like Kathy Bates in Misery, literally. And was just, from day one, took him over. And I started getting letters from his lawyers. Like, you know, my dad didn't have a lot left, but like the rights to his work, his assets, anything. My dad wasn't wealthy at that point. He was pretty down and out. And I said to her, "I don't want any of that stuff. I don't want anything, money, none of it. You can take all the Grammys and the money and whatever, the house, anything. I just want to see my daddy. That's it." You can be there or not. And she was like, you'll never see your father again as long as I live. And neither will your sister, and neither will his grandchild, and neither will any of his friends. And the only sort of piece of it was when I would meet up with friends of his, like, for instance, his best friend was Ray Bradbury. And I remember seeing Ray and Ray saying, I'm not allowed to see your daddy either. She just completely brainwashed him and took him to her house, and we never saw him again. So my dad died, to me, like 10 years before, 15 years before he actually died. But it's crazy.
Did you have to grieve him twice, though, I imagine? I mean, when he died?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And the second grieving was a little bit more of a finality. It was actually more of a, I don't want to say a relief, but like, it's over. Like, my father's gone now. So, it's kind of like when you're watching somebody die of cancer. Like when my mother died, it was terrible, but I was like, okay, she's out of pain. And there was closure, and the only closure I had, unfortunately, with my dad was his physical death. I never got to see him again. Her last call to us was, he's dead, I won.
So she was a sociopath.
Yes.
Or is, if she's still alive. Yeah.
She's alive. Yep. She is. In fact, it's interesting you say that, because my therapist at the time said, listen to me. This is beyond narcissism. This is truly a sociopath, a dangerous person, perhaps. And Gavin told me this too. He said, your dad has been bitten by a black widow, and if you go into that nest, just be aware, be safe, because this is a dangerous person. And there's any possibility here. She could kill you. Who knows? I don't know. All I know is I never saw him, and she's crazy.
Yeah.
There are crazy people out there.
Do you visit his grave?
I don't know where he's buried. She won't tell us. And it's sort of online, like you can find it, but I think she's never buried him. I think she's got his ashes somewhere. I don't know. I visit my dad. I think you'll be hip to this because you're cool. But like, like you're cool in a very spiritual way. But like, I kind of realized lately that I have like a little bit of clairaudience. And so not often, but often enough, and especially lately as I've been quarantined, it's interesting. I can hear my father. Mm. And it's more than just like, what would my father do? Or I can hear my father's voice in my head, but it's like a real, like, do this, call this person. And then I'll have a series of synchronicities where it's like, it's funny you called me because I was just thinking about your dad, or like the craziest crap. And so I feel like my parents they've taken on Jedi Council, like holograph form now.
Carrie would approve of that.
Yeah. And you know what? I honestly believe that they're all out there somewhere. I don't know what comes next, but I know that this is not it, man.
God, I hope not.
I hope not either.
Because what the hell did we all do?
Right. Exactly. We're in hell. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I have to believe.
Although there are dogs here, so that, that's a saving grace.
Yep. That's right.
You are probably, when I told some of my friends that I was talking to you today, and they would say, who's that? And I'd say, well, you probably know him from, and I said, Encyclopedia Britannica commercials.
Yeah.
How did that come about? That was one of your dad's as well, or?
Yep. So
that was a super famous, it got spoofed on SNL and stuff, right?
That was like my 14 minutes of fame, man. That was it. That was my Warhol fame. And a lot like Star Wars, my dad had no idea. My dad had done hundreds of commercials. He had no idea it was going to be a big hit like that. But my mother was my father's producer, and she was a genius, and in a much different way than my father. Anyway, the Encyclopedia Britannica approached my dad and said, listen, we are in trouble. Like, we need you. And we need your brilliant advertising eye to go and just make a commercial for us. And so my father was like...
And what year is this? Because the computers were starting to take over. I'm imagining people stopped looking at encyclopedias, which were in every home in America mostly.
Right. No Google and no internet. So my father just saw me playing computer games and using it as a word processor and, writing my homework on it. But he always used to say, like, why can't the computer... My dad was really smart. He was like, why can't the computer hook up to the library? Like, why can't you just... I don't get it. And so, like, what good is this stupid thing? Like, I love that you're playing video games and challenging your mind. I love that you can write a book report on your word processor. I love that you can, but there was no internet yet. So at that point, my father took on the campaign. I did the commercial, and he just said, listen, I had to audition, though. This is hilarious, because they said, we're trying to find this kid in the commercial that's basically going to be, like, really annoying, a know-it-all, kind of strangely endearing, despite his, like, smart-ass exterior, kind of cute, but, like, quirky and geeky.
Like Jason Bateman on Silver Spoons.
Exactly, right? My nemesis. So, as she's saying this, I'm not clued in. I'm like, all right, well, good luck with the casting. Good luck with that. All right, I'm going to go back to play with my robot now. And they were like, wait a minute. Like, could Donovan do it? And so, my dad was like, son, could you play a know-it-all, like, computer? And then it immediately became clear. Duh, like, Donovan's the guy. Like, he's exactly what you just described. And so we did this spot. And
the hair, you had the hair, too.
Oh, Jesus.
The hair
was so nuts.
Everything.
And the whole thing was crazy. And so my mom said, okay, they only have a limited budget for airtime, right? So we're going to buy MTV. It was the first season of The Real World, and which was like the first reality TV show for young people. And we're going to buy CNN because we were my dad got intel that we were about to start the first Iraq War. So my mother said, where will we have a captive audience? MTV, because of this reality show. That's what's coming. My parents were super ahead of the curve, obviously. And my dad said, war is coming. So we got to buy spots when people are watching the war on TV. And so they bought all the airtime on CNN and MTV. And, like, it was literally like, we've gone to war in the Middle East, back after this message. And then it'd be like, remember me. And then, like, all the kids are watching MTV, so they've got the parents watching a war, and the kids are watching MTV, and, like, sales went up 800% in, like, 2 weeks, and I got taken out to dinner by the head of, Encyclopedia. It was the most successful ad campaign my dad had ever done, probably at that point. And for them, it revitalized their brand. And we actually did, like, probably, I'm going to say, about a dozen different spots. And my dad said, I don't want anything in the background. It has to be a white background. He's going to be in limbo and a white psych. It's going to be super weird. You don't know where he is. Nothing.
That sweater.
Yeah. And so I didn't really even, it's like Carrie, right? I didn't even realize it was a big deal until I would go out, like, after the commercial had really hit. And then especially after MTV did it, I was like, ugh. And I would go out in public and people were like, oh my God, you're that dork, you're that nerd, you're that geek, encyclopedia nerd.
And when it was on the SNL sketch?
Yeah.
How'd you feel about that?
Well, they called me and asked me if I wanted to go on. And I've always had, like, agoraphobia and fear of traveling. And, like, I wasn't really, like, I was like, are you going to pay me? And they were like, well, you're not going to pay you. It's just exposure. And I was like, fuck you. I don't give a shit about your exposure. And so I was like, Mom, should I go on Saturday Night Live? And she's like, I don't know. Lorne Michaels is kind of a dick. And so, and my dad was like, yeah, you should go on that show. I'll go with you to New York. And I was like, I don't want to go on Saturday Night Live. I mean, look what it did to Carrie and Danny, and look what it did to all these comedians. It killed them with drugs. I hate Saturday Night Live. And so my dad and mom were like, good for you. We hate it too. Fuck it. We're not going on that. And so I never went on, which is so insane. And I ended up seeing Mike Myers, who was obviously friends with, I forget the guy's name now. Jesus Christ. Anyway, the guy David Spade. So David Spade was the guy that parodied me, and I was supposed to go on and fight David Spade. Like, we were supposed to have a punching match. I didn't like that either, the violence. Anyway, but Mike Myers was like, "Oh my God, you're the encyclopedia guy. Like, I'm gonna have to tell David about this." And I was like, "Please do." And like, no hard feelings. And they asked me to be on the show. He's like, "I know, I heard." And you turned him down. And I was like, "Yeah, I don't really want to be on Saturday Night Live." And Mike Myers was like, solid. Like that's a solid, like that's a power move, man. Like to tell him no. And so, now I wish, of course, I'd gone on and done it, but.
How old were you at that point?
17.
Did you have any experiences with the, Epsteins of the world or any of that kind of thing, or were you pretty well protected from that?
No, but I know that Epstein is a piece of garbage. I mean, I've always known that long before that news broke. Mm-hmm. My parents would just say, like, don't. At one point, I said to my parents, and I took a divergence into acupuncture school and psychology school and decided to go the route of becoming like a healer. And I told my parents, I said, look, I'm kind of done with this show business shit. Like, it's a good way to make money, but I don't really see it as a viable source of income in the future. This is where I was like Alex P. Keaton. I was like, how do you keep doing it? Where's the longevity in it? Like, and my mother was like, well, you're a man, so you got a lot more longevity than a woman would, believe me. But
she's not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what are you going to do instead? And I was like, I think I want to be a doctor or a therapist or go into the healing arts. And my mom's like, thank God you saved yourself a load of trouble. And so they were all for it.
Who do you think is the most iconic person that you interacted with throughout your childhood?
Jim Henson.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim Henson.
I met his son a couple months ago, and what a delightful, lovely man.
Yeah, I've met his son, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice guy. Yeah.
Looks just like him.
Yeah, I know. I think Jim, my dad, one of the first skits that Sam and Friends did, which was Jim's first like puppet improv group, was a skit of my dad's. And he was mad at first because they didn't pay him and he didn't know who they were. And he's like, nobody's going to lip sync my stuff. But then he saw it and they were like, we're thinking of calling it the Muppets. And like, my dad just loved it so much. And he wrote to Jim and they ended up hanging out, and my dad was giving Jim all sorts of like advice. And he's like, I think we got this thing. It's like a turtle. And my dad was like, that's not a turtle, that's a frog. And he's like, really? You think so? And my dad's like, definitely. That I've always known that thing is a frog. It's not, it doesn't look like a turtle. And so he starts talking to Jim about like ideas, and they became best friends and were best friends until Jim died. But at one point, we were at the Science Fiction Awards or the Emmys, anyway, and my dad says, I want you to meet Kermit's daddy. Aww. Kermit's daddy. Aww. And so I said, okay. So I went in and I said, hey, how are you? I'm Jim Henson. And I was like, wow, you sound like Ernie. And and I was like, you sound like the frog. And so I sat on Jim's lap and he took out Kermit and talked Kermit to me. And I mean, that to me,
that makes me want to cry right now.
I know. And like, he smelled like powdered donuts, and he had like donut in his beard. And my dad told me he was a real true genius, son. This is a real true good man. And so that was like my Fred Rogers moment. Like, I got to meet my hero is Jim Henson. So to me, that's more important than anybody else I've ever met. And I've met everybody pretty much.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, he was so sweet and so just what you'd think he would be.
Gentle.
Yeah.
And smart. Yeah.
Yes. That to me is really when you meet somebody who's your hero and they don't exactly act like your hero, then you're sad. But if you meet your hero and they're everything you hoped for and more, that's a good moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to Prince on the phone once. That was cool.
I love Prince.
Yeah. Those are like to me growing up, like those are the people that I was very enamored of and thought something of. That was like my childhood moment was Jim. Then like the teenage moment was Prince. And, I've met Madonna and all those people, but I don't really have anything bad or good to say. It's just,
I love all the stories about Prince that came out after he died because we all knew he was a genius. We knew what a kind soul. But to hear all the anonymous stuff that he did, after the fact, once all that was revealed after he passed away, that, when celebrity passes away, I'm like, oh, well, that happens or whatever. But there are certain people, Jim Henson cried, Prince, I cried, Glenn Frey, I cried, John Prine, I sobbed. I was making dinner, I was just sobbing. I think that was a combination of between the virus and the fear and the sadness, and John Prine as a songwriter, to me, that just hit so hard. Robin Williams, oh my gosh, I sobbed when he died.
David Bowie.
I didn't, Bowie, I knew he was sick for so long. I think I made peace with the fact that I knew he was going to die, so it didn't hit me as hard as some of the other people.
It's a shock, yeah, of course.
The shocking deaths are the worst.
Yeah. We're really good friends with Glenn and his family. Yeah. Really good. So I knew Glenn was quite sick, but it was kind of still...
It was a shock for me, yeah.
Never tough.
When I came across country to move here, I stopped in Winslow and spent the night, and I stood on the corner, and I cried. It was just, it's weird how certain things in the lexicon of who you are, the words and the songs that touch you, and the American Songbook and all that stuff, it just, some things just hit you just right,
Oh, God. And I think our generation, I don't know. My sister's generation saw a lot of death, but a lot of our icons in my generation, just one after the next, it seemed for a while there. It was like just so ghastly. Everybody's checking out,
When Carrie Fisher died, I cried. And then when Debbie Reynolds cried because I knew, when Debbie Reynolds died right after Carrie Fisher, that broke my heart.
Oh, I was at the memorial. I knew, it didn't surprise me. Okay. Only because knowing Debbie and knowing Carrie, it was very much like the relationship that my parents had. And I watched someone die and then another person die. Now, my dad didn't physically die, but when somebody's like Alpha and Omega is gone, and the other person's lived a life and is old, they just go. And it's almost like lovers or couples, you hear one goes and then the other one's dead a month later or whatever. It's like, Debbie just left the body. She just left. She literally made a choice to just walk out. And it's terrible. It's devastating. But I think she knew that she wanted to follow Carrie.
So sad.
It's terrible.
Woof. Well, Donovan, tell people how they can find you and read your stuff and learn more about you and that good news. Yeah.
I didn't know what this is going to be about, but we've had a wide sub. I feel like I guess this is how all podcast people feel, but I feel like I've monopolized the like if we were just chatting, I'd be like, I totally monopolized this conversation, man.
It's exactly how I wanted it.
Okay.
I feel, honestly, you and I could talk for about 5 hours and that would still not be enough, I feel like, so.
Well, yeah, and it's so funny because you, like many other friends of mine, are like on my list of people that I'm like, you know what? This is a really cool person that I need to spend more time with, IRL. And like,
thank you.
Now this fucking thing hits, it's like, We've had
some great combos though, driving around in your car and,
Yeah, I definitely have, yeah. anyway, I miss you, but I miss everyone, and this is tough. It's like I miss my family. I'm quarantining with my partner Eve and my girlfriend Miranda. She's like quarantining away from me, so like everybody has some level of like, oh, it's just terrible. But anyway, we'll get through this, I hope. But now that we're back to normal conversation, what am I saying? I haven't had enough caffeine.
How people can find you and read your blog and like all that stuff.
Yeah, so DonnavanFreberg.com is my website, just DONAVAN Freberg.com. And then like people can find me on Instagram at DonovanF, or they can find my professional Instagram at Donavan Freberg. Honestly, my photography just kind of has been, I'm a photographer. And I'm laughing because I never talked about that, but that's okay.
I know, I just realized, like, shit, I didn't even ask you about your photography. Don't worry about that. You're a phenomenal photographer.
Thank you so much. You know, to me, I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. I'm a storyteller. So I tell stories in various capacities, either with words, pictures, or anecdotes.
Yeah, your stories tonight, this afternoon, were lovely photographs of your life.
Yeah, that's all my photographs are, is just visual stories. But anyway, so Donavan Freberg is my professional Instagram, Donavan F. You can Google me and find a lot of weird stuff. I mean, that's fun.
What's your blog
page? Which is hilarious. That's Baby Boy Freberg. I think if you Google Baby Boy Freberg, you'll find stuff. Yeah, I'll put a links page together with all this too. Okay, that's cool. I'm pretty Googleable. Yeah, you're Googleable. I even have a GIF. If you write Encyclopedia Kid or Encyclopedia Guy, there's a GIF of me. Fantastic. Or a GIF. We won't go into that. I call them GIFs. I think it's GIF, isn't it? Look, you're the Encyclopedia Kid. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about GIFs versus GIFs. So anyway, it's graphic interchange format. So, I mean, if it's graphic, like graphic, then it's not going to be giraffic, right? So it's GIF. I agree. Yeah. That was a great impression of yourself. Thanks. I was almost brave enough to do an impression of Lorne Michaels when you were talking about him, but I didn't have the gumption. That's hilarious. I know, yeah. I mean, heck. Anyway. Yeah. Donavan, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. Goodness. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so glad we finally got it done. It took a little bit, but we're here. Yay. Be well anytime. And stay well. Please be well. You're well and you're quarantining. I'm good. Yeah. Okay. All's well. Staying safe. Staying safe. My roommate is wonderful. She's like my sister, and I've known her forever and ever. And we are hunkered down, whatever. There you go. We're all just waiting to reboot, or that's a whole other podcast. It is. Yeah. It is. I love you. Take care. I love you too. It's good to see you, and thank you so much. Thank you. You're great. I love your podcast. Everyone should listen. Oh, thanks, love. Bye, everybody. Okay. All right. Bye. Please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you. Bye.